Isn't it amazing how God works? I'm going to talk this morning about God's orchestration, how he orchestrates things to that sometimes we don't understand. And, we'd planned for a while. We'd ordered these books a while ago about Ramadan and didn't know that Rav, Sean, and Lisa were coming until just the other day. How many times do we have a former Muslim in our church? Not very often. And just God worked it out that today they showed up. So praise God for that. If you would turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 39. We're going to continue this morning in talking about some Old Testament stories. Genesis chapter 39. You ever kind of go through life and you feel like, God, where are you? What are you doing? What's going on? Why? The things that I had planned in my life aren't really working out the way I'd planned. And there's just some stuff going on that I'm not sure where this is leading or what's happening here, God. What are you doing? And I found in my own life, when we step back sometimes and we look at what God is really doing, kind of the big picture, we can see that God is kind of orchestrating things. And I want us to think about God this morning as like a conductor of an orchestra. The conductor of an orchestra will take seemingly pieces of music that seemingly don't fit together. If they're played by themselves, they sound awful. But if he puts them all together, it makes beautiful music. And sometimes I think God is kind of like that. He takes the big picture and he puts it all together to make something beautiful. And so I want to talk to you this morning about the story of Joseph. Joseph, the 11th son out of 12 of Jacob. He was Jacob's favorite son. Last time I spoke, we talked about Jacob and Esau. And, Jacob loved his son Joseph. He was his favorite son because he was from his favorite wife, Rachel. Remember Rachel that he worked for 14 years for? And so he goes and he makes him this coat of many colors, this beautiful coat. Showed favoritism to this boy. Isn't it funny how generations tend to repeat themselves? Last time we talked about Jacob, how Jacob's parents had favoritism, how Isaac loved Esau and Rebekah loved Jacob, and the problems that caused. We see that happening in families sometimes, don't we? It's kind of a generational thing. It gets passed from one generation to another. And we see that happening here where Jacob was showing favoritism to this one son. Well, if you remember the story how little Joseph had these dreams. These great dreams that God gave him that, he saw these sheaves of grain and all of a sudden there was 11 of them, and all of a sudden they bowed down to his sheaf of grain, and like a foolish young boy, he told his brothers about it, right? Not really something you want to do, but he did that. And then he gave him another dream of the moon and stars, and the moon and stars were bowing down to him, and signifying that his brothers and even his father and mother were bowing down to him. Of course, his brothers didn't like that very good, and so in fact, the Bible says they were furious with him. They were angry with him. So let's pick up the story in Genesis chapter 39. After his brothers had sold him into slavery, sold him to the Ishmaelites, merchants who were passing through, and they took him down to Egypt. And Joseph was sold into slavery. Chapter 39, verse 1 says, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph. You should underline that in your Bible. What? This guy had just been sold into slavery in a faraway country, never been there before, away from his family, away from everything that was familiar with him, to him. And it says, the Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success, in everything he did. Success? You call this success? Being a slave in a faraway country? Yeah, he was successful at that. It says Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. That's Bible speak for he was a hunk. All right, ladies, he was a hunk. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her, even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison and the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, there it is again, the Lord was with him. How could you sink any lower than that? Not only is he a slave in a foreign country, now he's in prison. And I would imagine an Egyptian prison was not a very pleasant place to be, but it says the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now, I want to draw out some principles from the life of Joseph this morning. Notice all the times it said God was with Joseph. Why? Why was God with Joseph? Why of all the people, this young little whippersnapper who was really obnoxious to his brothers, why did God choose to use him? Why was God with him? The first thing I want to point out is that God orchestrates through my mistreatment. You know, Joseph was severely mistreated by his brothers. He was mistreated by Potiphar's wife. He was falsely accused. Apparently Potiphar may not have fully believed his wife. Because I believe if he had, he would have just had Joseph killed. But instead he threw him into prison. And so apparently somewhere along the line, Joseph had made a decision that he was going to honor God, that he was going to be a person of character. Let's just think about Joseph's life a little bit. I imagine him as a little boy, his mother Rachel telling him stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his father, about the promises that God had given them. He heard about their encounters with God. Maybe he heard about Abraham and Isaac on the mountain and how God tested Abraham on the mountain. Maybe he heard about his father Jacob and his encounters with God at Bethel. I don't know exactly, but somewhere along the line, Joseph made a decision that he was going to live an honorable life. Maybe it was when he was strapped to the back of a wagon and being herded like a wild animal by the slave traders. Maybe it was then that he would decide no matter what happens, he's going to honor God to the best of his ability. So here he was a slave in the most modern society of that time, the most prosperous culture of that time. He was surrounded by idol worship. There was any kind of sin imaginable in that culture. And here he is tempted. Joseph knew the implications of that temptation. This was a powerful woman. He knew the implications if he gave into that temptation. He also knew the implications if he didn't give into that temptation. But we can tell by his answer that he also knew that he answered to a higher power. Notice his answer when Potiphar's wife came to him. He said, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against Potiphar?" That's not what he said. He said, "How can I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Does that cross your mind whenever you're tempted to do something? Or is it just the consequences of what you're doing? You're tempted to do something wrong. Is it just you're afraid of the consequences? Or are you afraid? That's called the fear of God. God sees everything. God sees everything. See, that's character. Being, he could have gone ahead and succumbed to the temptation. He could have, and maybe no one would have ever known. But he knew that God knew. He knew that God knew. But he was mistreated for it. Jesus tells us as Christians that we can expect to be mistreated and ridiculed by the world. In Luke 6:22, it says, "Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven." So don't be surprised if you face some mistreatment because you follow Jesus. God can orchestrate your life even through that, through your mistreatment. The next thing is God orchestrates for good when I honor him. When I honor him. A lot of people make the mistake of expecting God to orchestrate the events of their life for good, but they go on living life as if God doesn't exist. And then when things go wrong, they come back and say, "God, why'd you allow this to happen? Why did you do this?" Joseph was a prime example of the verse in 1 Peter, where it says, "Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us." Let's continue on with the story. Why was God with Joseph? I don't believe it was because he just happened to pull his name out of a hat. I think there was a reason God was with Joseph. Because he chose to live an honorable life. Because he chose to live a life that was pleasing to God. God had this amazing plan for his life. If Joseph had succumbed to that temptation, I think God could have raised up someone else. God could have done it some other way. But he saw in Joseph the character that he was looking for, a man that he could count on. If he would have succumbed to that temptation, we probably wouldn't know about Joseph today. He would have become just another statistic of a man who had fallen to lust. So he got thrown into prison for something he didn't do. Talk about a hopeless situation. Have you ever found yourself in just what seemed like a hopeless situation? Number 3, God orchestrates through my hopelessness. Through my hopelessness. Getting thrown into prison for committing a crime is one thing, but getting thrown into prison for something you didn't do is another thing. I've done a little prison ministry in my time, and it's always interesting to go into prison and talk to these inmates Every one of them will tell you they're not guilty. Every one of them. You don't believe a word they say, but there's always somebody else's fault. And but here he really wasn't guilty. But put yourself in Joseph's shoes. How would you respond to something like that? Anger, bitterness, hopelessness. Not Joseph. He's soon in charge of the prison. It says God blessed him. He was above the other prisoners. You just couldn't keep him down no matter what happened, what life threw his way. You just couldn't keep him down. He always seemed to make it to the top. So, you know the story. There's two guys that get thrown in there with him, the cupbearer and the baker who had offended Pharaoh, who were thrown into prison. We don't know exactly how they offended Pharaoh, but something happened that Pharaoh wasn't happy with, so he throws them into prison. They wind up in there with Joseph. Now, a cupbearer and a baker for Pharaoh had to be some pretty trustworthy guys. The cupbearer, his job was to make sure that whatever the Pharaoh was drinking wasn't poisoned. And he would often take a drink first before handing it to Pharaoh, just to make sure it wasn't poisoned, because as Pharaoh, he had a lot of enemies. And the baker as well. He's baking for the royal court. It had to be good, and it had to be free of poison. Maybe he burned the biscuits one day. Maybe that's how he was offended the Pharaoh. We don't know. But for some reason, they wound up in prison. So they both had dreams. And dreams were something Joseph knew something about. Let's pick up the story in chapter 40 in verse 9. So they come to Joseph. It says, so the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, in my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. So Joseph tells him what it means. Verse 12, this is what it means, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. So he tells him, good news, man. You got a good dream, good news. In 3 days, you're going back, and you're going to get your old job back. So let's move on. Verse 16. The baker also had a dream. It says, when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph. So notice what he says. He saw, hey, this is good. I had a dream too. He says, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Oh my, that wasn't such a good interpretation, was it? I'll bet he was sorry he told Joseph his dream. Well, that's exactly what happened. 3 days later, the cupbearer is restored to his position. 3 days later, the baker is brought out, and his head is lifted off of his shoulders. Before they left, Joseph tells the cupbearer, says, now, remember me when you get up there. Put in a good word for me with the Pharaoh. Well, time passes. He doesn't hear anything. He's still in prison for 2 more years. 2 more years. He's rotting away in prison. You think he was saying, God, have you forgotten me? Is this all there is? I want out of here now. I don't know how about you all, but I get kind of impatient sometimes. I ask God for things, and I'm like, I want it now. And God's like, my timing's not your timing. You got to wait a while. I found that God's timing is perfect. Isaiah 55:8 says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. Can you imagine how hard it must have been for Joseph to tell the baker the truth? My fourth point. God orchestrates my life when I'm honest. When I'm honest. Joseph was not a politically correct kind of guy. He told the baker exactly what his dream meant. He said it just like it was. And so 3 days later, that's what happened. You know, when you're honest, you get the attention of people. Proverbs 16 says, kings take pleasure in honest lips. They value the one who speaks what is right. You know, the cupbearer forgets about Joseph for 2 years, but when the right time came, God brought that memory back to him about this guy in prison. Which brings me to the fifth point. God orchestrates my life when I'm patient. Joseph keeps just doing his thing in prison. I imagine Joseph was thinking, is this all there is? Is this what God wants me to do the rest of my life? Maybe. Have you ever found yourself in that place? You're in a job that doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, and you might think, is this what God wants me to do the rest of my life? Maybe you're kind of bored with what you're doing, and you come to, is this it? Is this all there is? And maybe you're in that stage in life where you're in the midlife crisis thing, you know, the 40s. I don't know, it hits different times for different people, and, you know, and some people go out and do crazy things. Get a divorce, get a fast car, do crazy things during that. Why? Because it's like you get to a point where, is this it? Is this all there is? Joseph was patient. Reminds me of one of my favorite verses, Isaiah 40:31. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So after 2 years, all of a sudden, we start to see God's plan unfolding. Pharaoh also has a dream. Remember the dream? He had two dreams, actually. The first dream was, saw 7 fat cows coming out of the Nile River, saw 7 skinny cows come out and eat the fat cows. He's like, what the world does that mean? Then he saw 7 heads of grain, fat heads of grain, saw 7 skinny heads of grain come out and eat the 7 fat heads of grain. So he goes to all his magicians and says, hey guys, what do my dreams mean? They said, well, we don't know, we can't tell you, don't know. Finally the cupbearer says, hey, I remember this guy. I remember a guy in prison that interpreted my dream. I'll bet he can interpret yours too. Pharaoh says, go get him. Go get him now. If we go to chapter 41, Joseph says something very interesting. Pharaoh says to Joseph, says, this is my dream. Can you interpret my dreams for me? You know, I had this dream. Can you interpret my dreams? If I'd have been Joseph, I'd have said, I'm the dream doctor. I've been doing it my whole life. I can tell you what your dreams mean. He could have looked at that and said, this is my ticket out of here. But he says something very interesting. Verse 16 says, I cannot do it. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Which brings me to point number 6. God orchestrates my life when I'm willing to give him the credit. When I'm willing to give him the credit. Joseph said, nope, can't do it. I can't do it, but I know somebody who can. He knew where his power came from. It came from God, not from himself. You know, sometimes we get to thinking that we're pretty cool, we can do all these things. Remember where your power comes from. It comes from God. It comes from God. So he gives God the credit. Proverbs 3:6 says, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. There will be 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine. He told him this is what's going to happen. for 7 years. So Pharaoh says, hey, that sounds good to me. I'm putting you in charge. And so he went from being a prisoner, the lowliest person in the kingdom, to being right up next to Pharaoh. Why? Because he gave God the credit. Because he was honorable, because he did all these things. Pharaoh puts him in charge. And we know the rest of the story. Because of that, God had an amazing plan for his people. The people came and they gave Joseph 20% of everything they raised. And because of that, he was able to save his own people. And we'll talk about some more of that next time. But I want to bring us to point number 7. God's plan will eventually become clear. I think the key to understanding Joseph is understanding that he was tuned into God. Over and over, he gave God the credit. Over and over, it says, and God was with Joseph. God was able to use him in a mighty way. But I want you to turn to chapter 45. It'll move ahead a little bit to a time when Joseph's brothers had finally come down to Egypt, had been reunited with his brothers again. And his brothers were scared to death when they discovered who Joseph was, because they were afraid he was going to have revenge on them for what they had done to him. But I want you to notice what Joseph said. Genesis 45, verse 4. It says, then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Joseph recognized it wasn't just his brothers that had sold him into slavery. That was part of God's plan all along. He says, God sent me here ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me, there he says it again, ahead of you to preserve you, a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Verse 8, so then it was not you that sent me here, but God. It became very clear to Joseph at that point why God had sent him there. You know, maybe, I don't know where you are in your life. If you know exactly, maybe you know exactly where God wants you. You know exactly what God wants you to do. You know exactly why he's brought you through the things that he's brought you through. Maybe you're still kind of in the middle and you're wondering, like, God, why are you sending this to me? You know, I can look back on my life and I can see things that have happened in my own life that at the time I was like, God, why are you doing this? Why are you sending this to me? But now, years later, I can look back on those things and say, oh, I see why. You were teaching me something. You were kind of pushing me in a certain direction. You were orchestrating my life in a certain way. And it's a continuous unfolding thing. I'm sure there's things that 10 years from now I'll understand a lot better about the time right now than I do right now. But God orchestrates our lives. We're going to wind up this morning with a song that the worship team's going to come out and sing. A song called Steady My Heart. Most of you know it. I want you to think about the words of that song as we sing it this morning. Wish it could be easy. Why is life so messy? Why is pain a part of us? Think of the days, the pain that Joseph must have gone through all those years when he was in prison, when he was a slave, when he was mocked by his brothers, all those painful things that he went through. The song goes on and says, there are days I feel like nothing ever goes right. Sometimes it just hurts so much, but through it all, the song says, you steady my heart. That's my prayer for you this morning, that whatever it is that you're facing this morning, that God will steady your heart through it. God is still in control. He's still the orchestrator of your life, as well as Joseph's. Just remember to give him the credit. Remember to be honorable. Remember to be faithful to him. And he will always be faithful to orchestrate your life. Let's stand as we pray this morning. Father, we lift up your name today. We thank you, God, for your word. We thank you that you are the great orchestrator. You work in our lives. You work through situations that we look at and we're like, what in the world is going on? But you have a way of bringing it all together if we just submit to your will, give you the credit. Father, I lift up each person that's here today, and I pray, Father, that you would help us all to just submit to your will, that you would guide and direct us in everything that we do throughout this week, that we could, this orchestration could happen in our lives. Because you do mean it for good and not for evil. And thank you that you are a good God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you all.